The crack of a pistol echoed through the dusty streets of Silver Creek, sending Fiona Bennett's heart racing as she hurried along the wooden boardwalk, her reticule clutched tightly against her chest. It was 1878, and the small Wyoming town was no place for a woman alone after sunset, but the meeting with her potential employer had run longer than expected. Fiona quickened her pace, the hem of her modest blue calico dress sweeping just above her worn leather boots. At 22, she had traveled west from Boston with hopes of establishing herself as a schoolteacher, leaving behind the painful memories of her parents' deaths and the crushing debts that had forced her to sell their modest home. Silver Creek represented a fresh start, a chance to build something of her own. The street lamps cast long shadows as Fiona turned down a side street that would lead her to the boarding house where she had secured a room. The shortcut had seemed wise moments ago, but now she regretted her decision as she noticed the street was deserted, save for a man stumbling out of the saloon ahead. Even from a distance, she could tell he was intoxicated by his unsteady gait. Fiona considered turning back, but that would mean a much longer walk. Squaring her shoulders, she continued forward, hoping to pass by the man without incident. "Well, ain't you a pretty little thing?" the drunk slurred as she approached, stepping directly into her path. The stench of whiskey and unwashed clothes assaulted her nostrils. "Excuse me, sir," Fiona said firmly, attempting to step around him. The man's hand shot out, grabbing her arm with surprising strength. "Where you rushing off to, darlin'? Night's just getting started." Fiona's heart hammered against her ribs. "Please release me," she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady despite her growing fear. Instead of complying, the man yanked her closer. "Got a feisty one here," he chuckled, his bloodshot eyes narrowing. "I like that. Let go of me." Fiona struggled against his grip, dropping her reticule in the process. Her free hand pushed against his chest, but he only tightened his hold, causing her to wince in pain. "You heard the lady," a deep voice cut through the night air. "Let her go." Both Fiona and her attacker turned toward the source of the command. A tall figure stood a few paces away, his features partially obscured by the shadow cast by his wide-brimmed hat. What was unmistakable was the glint of metal as his hand rested casually on the revolver holstered at his hip. The drunk sneered. "Mind your own business, mister. Me and the lady are just getting acquainted." "I won't say it again." The stranger's voice remained level but carried an unmistakable threat. When the drunk didn't release her, the newcomer moved with startling speed. In one fluid motion, he closed the distance between them, grabbed the drunk by the collar, and wrenched him away from Fiona. The force of the separation sent her stumbling backward, but she managed to keep her footing. "You son of a—" The drunk swung wildly, but the stranger easily sidestepped the clumsy blow before delivering a single, powerful punch that sent the attacker sprawling into the dirt. The drunk lay there for a moment, groaning, before struggling to his knees. He spat a mouthful of blood onto the ground and glared up at his opponent. "You'll regret that," he threatened, his hand moving toward his boot where Fiona could now see the handle of a knife. In a blur of motion, the stranger drew his revolver and pointed it steadily at the drunk's head. "I suggest you reconsider," he said calmly. The drunk froze, his eyes crossing slightly as he focused on the barrel of the gun aimed between his eyes. After a tense moment, he raised his hands in surrender. "Get out of here," the stranger ordered, keeping his weapon trained on the man. "And if I see you bothering this lady or any lady again, you won't walk away so easily." The drunk scrambled to his feet, shooting one last venomous glare at them before staggering away into the darkness. Only when the man had disappeared from sight did the stranger holster his weapon and turn to Fiona. In the lamplight, she could now see him clearly. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a strong jaw dusted with stubble. His eyes, a striking shade of blue, regarded her with concern beneath the brim of his hat. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now. Fiona touched her arm where the drunk had grabbed her. It would likely bruise, but nothing was broken. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied, trying to steady her breathing. "I'm deeply grateful for your intervention, Mr. Vaughn." "Vincent Vaughn," he supplied, bending down to retrieve her fallen reticule. He handed it to her with a slight bow. "And you are?" "Fiona Bennett," she replied, accepting her belongings with trembling fingers. Vincent glanced down the dark street where the drunk had disappeared. "It's not safe for you to be walking alone, Miss Bennett." "Where are you headed?" "Mrs. Sullivan's boarding house," Fiona said. "It's just a few blocks from here." Vincent nodded. "I know the place. If you'll allow me, I'd be happy to escort you there." Fiona hesitated. While she was grateful for his help, she had learned to be cautious about trusting strangers, especially in this unfamiliar territory. As if sensing her uncertainty, Vincent took a small step back, giving her space. "I understand your reluctance, Miss Bennett," he said, "but I promise you'll be safer with me than without. That man might still be lurking around, and he struck me as the type to hold a grudge." The thought of encountering the drunk again made Fiona's decision easy. "You're right, Mr. Vaughn. I would appreciate your escort." Vincent offered his arm, which she took after only a slight pause. As they began walking toward the boarding house, Fiona became acutely aware of his solid presence beside her. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to dangerous situations, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. "You're new to Silver Creek," Vincent observed. It wasn't a question. "Is it that obvious?" Fiona asked with a small smile. "A bit," he admitted. "Folks around here know better than to take that particular shortcut after dark." "I'll remember that," Fiona said. "I arrived just yesterday from Boston. I'm hoping to secure the teaching position at the local school." Vincent glanced down at her with newfound interest. "We've been without a proper teacher for nearly 6 months. The children in this town could use some proper education." "You have children in the school, Mr. Vaughn?" Fiona asked, curious about this man who had come to her rescue. A shadow passed over his features. "No, madam. No wife, no children, just me and my ranch a few miles outside of town." "You're a rancher, then?" "Yes, madam. Got about 200 head of cattle and a decent stretch of land along the Pine River." They turned onto the main street, where several establishments were still illuminated and people moved about. Fiona felt some of the tension leave her shoulders at being back in a more populated area. "What brings a Boston lady all the way out to Wyoming territory?" Vincent asked. "It's a long way from home." Fiona hesitated, unsure how much of her circumstances to share with this stranger. "I was seeking a change," she finally said. "After my parents passed, there was little keeping me in Boston." Vincent nodded, not pressing for more details, which Fiona appreciated. They walked in comfortable silence for a block before he spoke again. "Silver Creek has its rough edges, but it's not a bad place once you get to know it. Good people, for the most part." "And the not-so-good ones?" Fiona asked, thinking of her attacker. Vincent's lips curved in a slight smile. "They usually learn to behave themselves one way or another." Something in his tone suggested he had played a role in teaching that lesson more than once. They reached the boarding house, a 2-story building with a small front porch and neat curtains visible in the windows. A warm light glowed from within, offering a welcoming sight after the evening's events. "Here we are," Vincent said, releasing her arm as they stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. "Safe and sound." "Thank you again, Mr. Vaughn," Fiona said sincerely. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." "No need for thanks, Miss Bennett. Any decent man would have done the same," He tipped his hat to her. "I hope you get that teaching position. Our town could use someone like you." Before Fiona could respond, the front door opened, and Mrs. Sullivan, the boarding house proprietor, peered out. She was a plump woman in her 50s with a perpetually worried expression. "Miss Bennet, I was getting concerned," she called. Then her eyes widened as she noticed Vincent. "Mr. Vaughn, what a surprise to see you in town." "Evening, Mrs. Sullivan," Vincent greeted her with a respectful nod. "I was just ensuring Miss Bennet made it home safely." Mrs. Sullivan's expression shifted from surprise to understanding. "Well, that's mighty kind of you. Would you care to come in for some coffee?" Vincent shook his head. "Thank you, but I should be getting back to my ranch." "Got an early start tomorrow." He turned back to Fiona. "Good night, Miss Bennet. Welcome to Silver Creek." "Good night, Mr. Vaughn," Fiona replied, "and thank you again." With another tip of his hat, Vincent turned and walked back down the street, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the night. Fiona watched him go, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. She had never been the sort to be swept off her feet by a handsome face, but there was something about Vincent Vaughn that intrigued her beyond his timely rescue. "Come inside, dear," Mrs. Sullivan urged, drawing Fiona's attention back to the present. "You look like you've had quite an evening." As Fiona followed her landlady into the warmth of the boarding house, she couldn't help but wonder if she would see the mysterious rancher again. The next morning, Fiona awoke early, determined to put the previous night's encounter behind her and focus on her interview with the town council. The teaching position was crucial to her plans for a new beginning, and she couldn't afford any distractions, even handsome cowboys who rescued damsels in distress. After dressing in her most professional attire, a high-necked, navy blue dress with modest lace trim, she pinned her auburn hair into a neat bun and descended to the boarding house dining room for breakfast. Mrs. Sullivan was already bustling about, serving coffee to the few other boarders who had risen early. She beamed when she saw Fiona. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well despite the excitement?" "Yes, thank you," Fiona replied, accepting a cup of coffee gratefully. "I must say, I was surprised to see you in the company of Vincent Vaughn last night," Mrs. Sullivan continued, lowering her voice despite the fact that no one was paying them any attention. "He's not usually one for escorting ladies home." Fiona sipped her coffee to hide her curiosity. "He was kind enough to help me when I had a disagreement with an intoxicated gentleman." Mrs. Sullivan's eyes widened. "Oh my. Well, you were fortunate Mr. Vaughn was nearby. He's not often in town these days, keeps to himself out at that ranch of his." "You seem to know him well," Fiona observed. "Everyone knows everyone in Silver Creek, dear," Mrs. Sullivan replied with a dismissive wave of her hand. "But Vincent Vaughn has been something of a mystery since he returned from the war. Bought that ranch with his army pay, they say, and has built it into one of the most successful operations in the county." "The war," Fiona echoed. "Fought for the Union," Mrs. Sullivan confirmed. "Came back different according to those who knew him before, quieter, keeps his own counsel. But fair in his dealings and generous when the town has needed help." She leaned closer. "Unmarried, too, which has every mother with an eligible daughter quite interested, though he's shown no inclination to court anyone." Fiona felt her cheeks warm. "I'm not looking for a husband, Mrs. Sullivan. I came west to teach." The older woman gave her a knowing smile. "Of course, dear, just sharing the local information. It's always good to know who's who in a new place." Before Fiona could respond, the clock on the mantel chimed 8, reminding her of her appointment. "I should be going. The council is expecting me at past. "Good luck, dear," Mrs. Sullivan called as Fiona gathered her materials and headed for the door. "Though I suspect you won't need it. We desperately need a qualified teacher." The town hall was a modest but dignified building in the center of Silver Creek. Inside, Fiona was ushered into a small meeting room where 5 men sat around a large oak table. Mayor Hollister, a portly man with impressive mutton chops, stood to greet her. "Miss Bennett, thank you for coming. Please have a seat." The interview proceeded smoothly. Fiona detailed her education at the Boston Female Normal School and her brief experience as an assistant teacher before her parents' illness had forced her to abandon her position to care for them. The council members seemed impressed by her credentials and passionate about improving education in their growing town. "We have nearly 30 children of school age," Mayor Hollister explained. "Our last teacher left rather abruptly when she decided to marry a miner passing through on his way to Montana. The children have had only sporadic instruction since. I assure you, I have no plans to marry a passing miner," Fiona said with a smile, earning chuckles from the council. "I'm committed to establishing a quality educational program here." As the interview concluded, Mayor Hollister exchanged glances with the other council members before turning back to Fiona with a broad smile. "Well, Miss Bennett, I believe I speak for all of us when I say we would be delighted to offer you the position of school teacher for Silver Creek. The salary is $40 per month, with lodging provided in the small house behind the schoolhouse. Would that be acceptable?" Fiona's heart soared. "Yes, absolutely. When would you like me to start?" "Monday next, if that suits you," the mayor replied. "It will give you time to settle in and prepare. The previous teacher left her materials such as they were, so you'll have something to work with." "Thank you, gentlemen. I won't disappoint you." As Fiona left the town hall, her step was lighter than it had been in months. For the first time since her parents' deaths, she felt genuine hope for her future. The teaching position would provide stability and purpose, and the included housing meant she could leave the boarding house sooner than expected, saving precious funds. Lost in her thoughts, she nearly collided with someone on the boardwalk outside the general store. "Oh, I'm terribly sorry," Fiona began, then stopped as she recognized the tall figure. "Mr. Vaughn." Vincent tipped his hat, a hint of a smile warming his otherwise serious face. "Miss Bennett, you're looking considerably happier than when I last saw you." "I am," she confirmed. "I've just been offered the teaching position." "Congratulations," he said, and his smile broadened slightly. The town council made a wise choice. Fiona noticed he was carrying several packages. "Stocking up supplies," Vincent nodded. "Ranch needs constant maintenance. Always something breaking or running out." He hesitated, then added, "I was about to get some lunch at the hotel restaurant. Would you care to join me to celebrate your new position?" The invitation caught Fiona by surprise. In Boston, such an offer from a man she barely knew would have been considered improper without a chaperone. But she was beginning to understand that the social rules of the East didn't always apply in the West, where practicality often trumped propriety. "That would be lovely," she found herself saying. "Thank you." Vincent looked pleased, if a bit surprised by her acceptance. "The hotel serves the best food in town," he said, gesturing toward a 2-story building down the street. "Not saying much, perhaps, but better than my own cooking, which is recommendation enough." As they walked toward the hotel, Fiona was acutely aware of the curious glances from townspeople they passed. She suspected Vincent's escort of a new woman in town was fodder for the local gossip mill. Mrs. Sullivan would certainly hear about it before supper time. The hotel restaurant was modest but clean, with white tablecloths and actual silverware, which Fiona had learned was something of a luxury in frontier establishments. A middle-aged waitress led them to a corner table and handed them menus. "The special today is beef stew," she informed them. "Fresh baked bread, too." "That sounds perfect," Fiona said. Vincent nodded his agreement and the waitress departed to place their order. "So, you'll be starting at the school soon?" Vincent asked, folding his hands on the table. "Monday next," Fiona confirmed. "I'm eager to begin, though I confess I'm a bit nervous about the state of things. Mayor Hollister mentioned the previous teacher left rather suddenly." Vincent chuckled. "That's putting it mildly." Miss Winters abandoned her post mid-lesson when a gold prospector promised to make her a wealthy woman in Montana. The children had quite a tale to tell their parents that day. "How dreadful," Fiona said, though she couldn't help smiling at the image. No wonder the council seemed so relieved to have a qualified applicant. "The children need stability," Vincent agreed. "Too many people pass through places like Silver Creek without putting down roots. It's hard on a community." "And you?" Fiona asked. "Have you put down roots here?" Something flickered in Vincent's eyes, a memory, perhaps, or an old wound. "As deep as they'll go," he said after a moment. "I fought my way across half the country during the war, saw enough places to know where I wanted to stay when it was over." Before Fiona could respond, the waitress returned with 2 steaming bowls of stew and a basket of fresh bread. The rich aroma made Fiona realize how hungry she was after her nervous morning. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Vincent spoke again. "How are you finding Silver Creek so far? Besides the unwelcome reception last night, that is." "Everyone has been very kind," Fiona said. "Though I sense I'm something of a curiosity." Vincent smiled. "Single women traveling alone to the frontier are still uncommon enough to raise interest. Especially educated Easterners." "And what about you, Mr. Vaughn?" Fiona asked, emboldened by his open manner. "Mrs. Sullivan suggested you're something of a local mystery yourself." Vincent raised an eyebrow. "Did she now? I wasn't aware I warranted such attention." "A successful rancher, war veteran, and eligible bachelor," Fiona teased gently. "In a town this size, that's practically celebrity status." To her delight, a flush of color appeared on Vincent's tan cheeks. "Mrs. Sullivan talks too much," he muttered, though there was no real annoyance in his tone. "She means well," Fiona assured him, "and she speaks very highly of you." Vincent busied himself with a piece of bread. "Most folks around here are decent people," he said. "They welcomed me when I had nothing but the clothes on my back and nightmares that kept me awake. I'm grateful for that." The simple honesty of his statement touched Fiona. She sensed there was much more to his story, but also that this wasn't the time or place to press for details. "I hope I'll find the same welcome," she said instead. "You will," Vincent assured her. "Especially once the children start coming home talking about their new teacher. Nothing wins over parents faster than happy, learning children." The rest of their meal passed pleasantly, with Vincent telling her more about Silver Creek and the surrounding area. He described the beauty of the nearby mountains, the changing seasons, and the challenges and rewards of ranching life. Fiona found herself captivated not just by his descriptions, but by the man himself. Beneath his reserved exterior was a thoughtful, intelligent person with a dry humor that frequently caught her by surprise. When they finished their meal, Vincent insisted on paying, waving away Fiona's protests. "Consider it a welcome to Silver Creek," he said firmly. Outside the hotel, they paused on the boardwalk. The afternoon sun bathed the town in golden light, and for a moment, Fiona was struck by how different this was from the crowded streets of Boston. There was an openness here, a sense of possibility that she found both frightening and exhilarating. "Thank you for lunch, Mr. Vaughn," she said. "It was most enjoyable." "Vincent," he corrected her gently. "If we're to be neighbors of sorts, Mr. Vaughn seems overly formal." Fiona smiled. Vincent then. And you must call me Fiona. He nodded, then glanced toward the general store where his packages waited. I should finish my errands and head back to the ranch. There's always work waiting. Of course, Fiona said, trying to hide her disappointment that their time together was ending. I have preparations to make for the school as well. Vincent hesitated, then asked, will you be at the social on Saturday? The town holds one each month at the meeting hall. I didn't know about it, Fiona admitted. But yes, I suppose I should attend, meet more of the community. Good, Vincent said, looking pleased. Perhaps I'll see you there. With a tip of his hat, he turned and headed back toward the general store. Fiona watched him go, aware of a fluttering sensation in her chest that had nothing to do with her new job and everything to do with the tall rancher who had come to her rescue. The next few days passed in a flurry of activity as Fiona prepared for her new role. She moved from the boarding house to the teacher's cottage, a small but comfortable two-room structure behind the schoolhouse. The furnishings were sparse but serviceable. A narrow bed, a chest of drawers, a small table with 2 chairs, and a cooking stove. Mayor Hollister's wife had thoughtfully provided basic linens and kitchen necessities, and Mrs. Sullivan had sent along a basket of food to tide her over until she could shop for herself. The schoolhouse itself was in better condition than Fiona had feared. Though rustic, with simple benches and desks, the building was solid, with large windows that provided good light. A blackboard dominated the front wall, and a pot-bellied stove stood ready for the cooler months ahead. The previous teacher's materials were limited: a few outdated textbooks, a worn Bible, and a primer, but Fiona had brought her own books and teaching aids from Boston. On Saturday morning, Fiona was arranging the classroom when a knock at the open door interrupted her work. She turned to find a woman about her own age standing there, a friendly smile on her pretty face. "Hello there. You must be our new teacher," the woman said, stepping inside. She wore a simple but well-made dress, her blonde hair neatly arranged beneath a modest bonnet. "I'm Charlotte Williams. My husband runs the mercantile." "Fiona Bennett," Fiona replied, shaking the offered hand. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "I wanted to welcome you to Silver Creek," Charlotte said, "and to invite you to sit with us at the social tonight. First gatherings can be overwhelming when you don't know anyone." "That's very kind of you," Fiona said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "I was planning to attend, but I admit I was a bit anxious about it." Charlotte waved away her concerns. "Nonsense. We're not so sophisticated as Boston folk, but we're friendly enough. And everyone is eager to meet the woman who's going to educate our children." She glanced around the schoolroom approvingly. "You've already made improvements. The last teacher couldn't be bothered to sweep the floor most days." "I believe environment affects learning," Fiona explained. "Children respond better in an orderly, clean space." "I couldn't agree more," Charlotte said. "My Thomas starts school this year. He's 5 and full of questions I can't always answer. He's thrilled about having a real teacher." They chatted for a while longer, with Charlotte offering practical advice about living in Silver Creek and promising to introduce Fiona to other young women in the community. By the time she left, Fiona felt considerably more at ease about the evening social. Later, as she dressed for the event, Fiona found herself taking more care with her appearance than was strictly necessary for a community gathering. She chose her best dress, a forest green silk with modest lace trim that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion. She arranged her hair in a style slightly more elaborate than her usual practical bun, allowing a few curls to frame her face. As she pinned a cameo brooch to her collar, a gift from her mother on her 18th birthday, Fiona admitted to herself that her extra efforts had a specific audience in mind. The thought of seeing Vincent again had occupied more of her thoughts than she cared to acknowledge. The meeting hall was transformed for the social, with lanterns casting a warm glow over the space. Tables laden with food lined one wall, and a small group of musicians tuned their instruments in a corner. People of all ages filled the room, their conversation and laughter creating a welcoming atmosphere. Charlotte spotted Fiona as soon as she entered and hurried over to greet her. "You look lovely. Come, I'll introduce you around." The next hour passed in a blur of names and faces as Fiona met what felt like half the town. Everyone was welcoming, though she noted the speculative glances from some of the older women and the appreciative looks from several unmarried men. By the time Charlotte led her to the refreshment table, Fiona's head was spinning. "Overwhelming, isn't it?" Charlotte laughed, handing Fiona a cup of punch. "Don't worry, you won't be expected to remember everyone's name right away." "I hope not," Fiona replied with a smile. "Though I suppose I'll learn the children's names quickly enough." "Speaking of children," Charlotte said, gesturing toward the door, "there's someone Thomas has been asking about all week." Fiona turned to follow her gaze and felt her heart skip a beat. Vincent had just entered the hall, looking remarkably different from their previous encounters. Gone was the trail-worn cowboy. In his place stood a gentleman in a well-cut dark suit, his usually tousled hair neatly combed, his face freshly shaved. Several people greeted him, which he acknowledged with nods and brief words as he scanned the room. When his eyes found Fiona, a smile transformed his serious features, and he began making his way toward her. "Well, well," Charlotte murmured beside her. "Vincent Vaughn cleaned up and at a social." "That's a rare sight indeed." Before Fiona could respond, Vincent reached them. "Good evening, ladies," he said, tipping his head respectfully. "Charlotte, you're looking well." "Thank you, Vincent," Charlotte replied with a knowing smile. "I was just keeping our new teacher company until she gets her bearings, but I see she's in good hands now." With a wink at Fiona that made her blush, Charlotte excused herself to join her husband across the room. "You came," Vincent said, his blue eyes warm as they met Fiona's. "As did you," she countered. "I gather that's somewhat unusual." Vincent's lips quirked in a half-smile. "I'm not much for crowds or dancing," he admitted, "but some occasions warrant the effort." The simple statement sent a pleasant warmth through Fiona. Before she could respond, the musicians struck up a lively tune, and couples began moving to the cleared area in the center of the hall. Vincent hesitated, then extended his hand. "Would you care to dance, Fiona?" She placed her hand in his, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and an outdoor life. "I'd be delighted, Vincent." He led her to the dance floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while keeping a proper distance between them. Despite his earlier disclaimer, Vincent proved to be a capable dancer, guiding her smoothly through the steps of the country reel. "For someone who doesn't dance much, you're quite skilled," Fiona observed as they circled each other. "My mother insisted all her sons learn," Vincent explained. "Said a man should know how to move with a woman without stepping on her toes, literally or figuratively." "Wise woman," Fiona laughed. "How many brothers do you have?" A shadow crossed Vincent's face. "Had two, both younger. They didn't come back from the war." "I'm so sorry," Fiona said, immediately regretting her question. Vincent shook his head. "You couldn't have known. It was a long time ago." The music shifted to a slower waltz, and Vincent drew her slightly closer, though still maintaining a respectable distance. Fiona was acutely aware of his hand at her waist, warm and steady. "And your parents?" she asked gently. "Gone too. Father before the war, mother just after. It's just me now." There was a matter-of-factness to his tone that spoke of long-accepted grief. "We have that in common then," Fiona said softly. "Being alone." Vincent's eyes held hers, something unspoken passing between them. "It doesn't always have to stay that way," he said, his voice low. The intensity of his gaze made Fiona's heart race. She had come west to start anew, to establish herself as a teacher, not to lose her heart to the first handsome man who showed her kindness. Yet there was something about Vincent Vaughn that called to her in a way no man ever had. The moment was broken when the music ended and applause filled the hall. Vincent reluctantly released her, and they joined in the clapping. "Would you like some air?" he asked as the musicians prepared for the next number. "It's getting warm in here." Fiona nodded, and he led her toward the side door that opened onto a small porch. Outside, the night was cool and clear, stars glittering in the vast Wyoming sky. A few other couples had had the same idea, but they found a quiet corner away from the others. "It's beautiful," Fiona breathed, gazing up at the stars. "I've never seen so many." "One of the things I love about this place," Vincent said, following her gaze upward. "The sky seems endless, makes a person feel small, but in a good way." "I know what you mean," Fiona agreed. "In Boston, the buildings crowd out the sky. Here, there's room to breathe." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the music from inside creating a distant backdrop to the night sounds. "How are your preparations for the school coming along?" Vincent asked. "Well, I think," Fiona replied. "The schoolhouse is in decent condition, though I've had to improvise with teaching materials. Books are scarce out here." Vincent nodded thoughtfully. "I have quite a few books at the ranch. Nothing specifically for teaching, but classics, history, some science." "You're welcome to borrow whatever might be useful." "That's very generous," Fiona said, surprised and pleased by the offer. "I would appreciate that greatly." "I could bring them by the school tomorrow afternoon if that suits you," Vincent suggested. "That would be perfect," Fiona agreed, trying to contain her eagerness at the prospect of seeing him again so soon. A comfortable silence fell between them again, broken only when Vincent spoke softly, almost to himself. "I'm glad you came to Silver Creek, Fiona Bennett." She turned to look at him, finding his eyes already on her face, his expression open and earnest in a way it hadn't been before. "So am I," she replied honestly. The moment stretched between them, charged with possibility. For an instant, Fiona thought he might kiss her and found herself hoping he would. But Vincent was too much of a gentleman for such a forward action in public, and instead he simply offered his arm. "Shall we go back inside? I believe I promised you another dance." The rest of the evening passed in a pleasant blur. Vincent stayed by Fiona's side, introducing her to people she hadn't yet met, dancing with her twice more, and ensuring her punch cup was never empty. By the time the social began to wind down, Fiona felt more at home in Silver Creek than she had anywhere since leaving Boston. As the evening concluded, Vincent offered to walk her home. The night had grown cooler, and he draped his jacket over her shoulders despite her protests that she wasn't cold. "My mother would turn in her grave if I let a lady shiver," he insisted, his tone light but firm. They walked slowly, neither seeming eager for the evening to end. The streets were quiet, most of the town either still at the social or already home for the night. "Thank you for making my first social such a pleasant experience," Fiona said as they approached the teacher's cottage. "I was quite nervous about it." "You'd never have known it," Vincent assured her. "You charmed everyone." "Even the mothers with eligible daughters," Fiona teased, recalling the speculative looks from some of the older women when she and Vincent had danced. Vincent chuckled. "Especially them. They've been trying to marry me off for years. I think they're relieved to see me showing interest in someone suitable for once." The casual implication that he was interested in her sent a thrill through Fiona. They reached her door all too soon, and she reluctantly removed his jacket, handing it back with a small smile. "Thank you again," For everything. Vincent took the jacket, his fingers brushing hers in the process. It was my pleasure. He hesitated, then added, I'll bring those books by tomorrow afternoon if that's still agreeable. Very much so, Fiona confirmed. I'll look forward to it. For a moment they stood in silence, the air between them charged with unspoken feelings. Then Vincent took her hand, raised it to his lips and pressed a gentle kiss to her knuckles. Good night, Fiona, he said, his voice low and warm. Good night, Vincent, she replied, her voice slightly breathless. With a final smile, he turned and walked away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. Fiona watched until he disappeared, then entered her cottage, her hand still tingling where his lips had touched it. As she prepared for bed, Fiona found herself humming one of the waltzes they had danced to, her mind replaying the evening's events. It was too soon, she told herself firmly. Too soon to be feeling this way about a man she barely knew, in a place she was just beginning to understand. Yet as she drifted off to sleep, it was Vincent's blue eyes and gentle smile that followed her into her dreams. The next day dawned bright and clear. Fiona spent the morning finalizing her lesson plans for the coming week, arranging the classroom exactly as she wanted it, and writing the basic rules of conduct on the blackboard. By mid-afternoon, she had accomplished everything on her list and found herself glancing frequently at the window, watching for Vincent's arrival. When he finally appeared, riding a magnificent chestnut horse and leading a pack mule laden with saddlebags, Fiona had to resist the urge to rush outside to greet him. Instead, she smoothed her skirts, checked her hair in the small mirror by the door, and waited for his knock. Afternoon, Vincent said when she opened the door, hat in hand. He looked more like the cowboy she had first met in practical work clothes and boots, his dark hair tousled by the wind. I brought those books I mentioned. Please come in, Fiona invited, stepping aside. Vincent entered, glancing around the schoolroom with interest. You've made it look like a proper school already, he observed. The children will be impressed. I hope so, Fiona replied. First impressions matter, especially with children. Vincent nodded toward the door. The books are in the saddlebags. Would you like me to bring them in, please? Fiona said. And you must stay for tea to thank you for your trouble. A smile crossed Vincent's face. No trouble at all, but I won't refuse the tea. He returned moments later with 2 bulging saddlebags, setting them carefully on one of the student desks. I wasn't sure what would be useful, so I brought a variety. Fiona opened the bags to find them packed with books far more than she had expected. There were novels by Dickens, Austen, and Cooper, history texts covering ancient civilizations to recent American events, scientific treatises on geology, astronomy, and natural history, and even a few volumes of poetry. Vincent, this is incredible, she breathed, running her fingers reverently over the embossed leather covers. These must be half your library, he shrugged, looking slightly embarrassed by her enthusiasm. Reading helps pass the long winter evenings. And books are old friends, they deserve to be shared. Fiona selected a beautifully illustrated volume on North American wildlife. This will be perfect for nature studies, she said, flipping through the detailed engravings of animals and plants. The children will love it. There's a companion volume on birds in there too, Vincent mentioned, pointing to another book, and a basic primer on astronomy that explains the constellations in simple terms. They spent the next hour going through the books, with Vincent occasionally offering comments about which ones he had found particularly interesting or useful. Fiona was impressed not just by the breadth of his collection, but by how well-read he clearly was. This was no ordinary cowboy, but a man of education and intellect who had chosen the ranching life deliberately. Eventually, remembering her promise of tea, Fiona excused herself to the cottage to prepare it. When she returned with a tray bearing a teapot, cups, and some biscuits Mrs. Sullivan had sent along, she found Vincent examining the maps she had pinned to the wall. "These are good," he said, "but they don't show much detail of the local area." "No, they don't," Fiona agreed, setting down the tray. "I was hoping to find something more specific to Wyoming territory, but the general store had limited options." Vincent accepted the cup of tea she offered. "I have some survey maps at the ranch that show the local geography better. I could make copies of the relevant sections for you." "That would be wonderful," Fiona said. "I want the children to understand their immediate surroundings as well as the wider world." They sat at her desk, sipping tea and discussing her plans for the school. Vincent offered several practical suggestions based on his knowledge of the local families and their children. "The Marshall boys will be your biggest challenge," he warned. "Good kids at heart, but wild as young colts. Their father lets them run free since their mother died." "I've dealt with high-spirited boys before," Fiona assured him. "Structure and clear expectations usually help, along with plenty of opportunities to burn off excess energy." Vincent nodded approvingly. "You understand children well." "I love teaching," Fiona said simply. Watching a child grasp a new concept, seeing that moment of understanding dawn, there's nothing quite like it. "You never thought of having your own?" Vincent asked, then immediately looked embarrassed by the personal nature of the question. "Forgive me, that's none of my business." "It's all right," Fiona assured him. "I always assumed I would marry and have children someday, but life had other plans." She hesitated, then added quietly, "My parents' illness consumed the years when most women my age were courting and marrying. By the time they passed, I felt behind somehow. Out of step with my peers." Vincent's eyes held understanding. "The war did that for many of us," he said. "Stole the years when we should have been building normal lives. By the time it ended, everything had changed, including us." The simple statement held such truth that Fiona felt tears prick her eyes. "Yes, exactly," she whispered. "Changed in ways others can't quite understand. Unless they've experienced similar changes themselves," Vincent added softly. Their eyes met over their teacups, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. For the first time since her parents' deaths, Fiona felt truly seen by another person, not pitied or judged, but simply understood. The moment was broken by the distant church bell tolling 4 o'clock. Vincent blinked and set down his cup. "I should be getting back to the ranch," he said reluctantly. "I left my foreman in charge, but there's always more to do." "Of course," Fiona said, rising. "Thank you again for the books. They'll make such a difference to my teaching." "Keep them as long as you need," Vincent said, standing and reaching for his hat. "And if there's anything else that would help, just let me know." They walked to the door together, both moving slower than necessary, as if neither wanted to end their time together. "Will I see you in town for church services?" Fiona asked as they stepped outside. Vincent nodded. "I try to make it most Sundays. Perhaps we could have dinner afterward at the hotel, to celebrate your first day of teaching." "I'd like that," Fiona said, pleased by the invitation. Vincent placed his hat on his head, then hesitated, looking down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Good luck tomorrow, Fiona, though I doubt you'll need it. This town is fortunate to have you." Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed a brief, gentle kiss to her cheek, his lips warm against her skin. Then, with a tip of his hat, he was striding toward his horse, leaving Fiona standing on the schoolhouse steps with her fingers pressed to the spot where his lips had touched. Monday morning arrived with a mixture of excitement and nervousness for Fiona. She dressed with care in a practical but presentable blue dress, arranged her hair in its usual neat bun, and arrived at the schoolhouse an hour before the children were due. The morning sun streamed through the windows as she made final preparations, writing a welcome message on the blackboard and arranging her desk with the necessary materials for the day's lessons. At precisely 8 o'clock, she stepped outside and rang the bell that hung beside the schoolhouse door. Within minutes, children began arriving, some eagerly running ahead of parents, others hanging back shyly. By 1:15, 27 students ranging in age from 5 to 16 had assembled in the schoolyard. Fiona greeted each one by name, having memorized the school register provided by Mayor Hollister. When all were present, she invited them inside, directing them to seats appropriate to their ages and sizes. The younger children took the front benches, while the older students sat toward the back. "Good morning," Fiona began once they were settled. "I am Miss Bennett, your new teacher. I'm very pleased to meet all of you and excited to begin our learning journey together." She spent the first hour getting to know the children, asking each to stand and share something about themselves. As Vincent had warned, the three Marshall boys aged 8, 10, and 12 showed signs of restlessness, but they responded well when Fiona gave them specific tasks, such as distributing slates and chalk. By mid-morning, Fiona had divided the students into groups based on their previous education and abilities. While the older children worked on mathematics problems, she sat with the youngest group, helping them form letters on their slates. The day passed quickly, with only minor disruptions: a brief argument over a pencil, a first-grade girl's tears when she struggled with her letters, and a game of tag during lunch recess that became overly boisterous. Fiona handled each situation calmly and fairly, establishing her authority without harshness. When the final bell rang at 3 o'clock, Fiona stood at the door as the children filed out, many of them smiling and calling goodbyes. Several parents waited in the schoolyard, eager to hear about the first day with the new teacher. "Miss Bennett," called Mrs. Williams, approaching with young Thomas in tow. "How was your first day?" "Wonderful," Fiona replied honestly. "Your son is very bright. He already knows his letters better than many of the older children." Thomas beamed at the praise, and Charlotte squeezed his shoulder proudly. "He's been practicing every night. He was so excited about starting school." Other parents approached with similar questions, and Fiona took time to speak with each one, offering specific observations about their children. By the time the schoolyard cleared, the sun was beginning to dip toward the western horizon. Fiona returned to the classroom to straighten up and prepare for the next day. She was arranging books on the shelf when a knock at the open door made her turn. Vincent stood in the doorway, hat in hand, a bouquet of wildflowers in the other. "I heard the first day was a success," he said, stepping inside. "These are to celebrate." He handed her the flowers, a colorful assortment of prairie blooms. "They're beautiful," Fiona said, touched by the gesture. "Thank you. And yes, it went well, I think. The children are eager to learn." "Even the Marshall boys?" Vincent asked with a raised eyebrow. Fiona laughed. "Even them, though they needed a bit more direction than the others. James, the middle one, has quite a talent for mathematics." Vincent nodded. "Their father will be pleased to hear that. He worries about them, though he doesn't always show it well." Fiona found a jar to serve as a makeshift vase for the flowers, placing them on her desk where they added a cheerful splash of color to the room. "I've been thinking," Vincent said, watching her arrange the blooms. "If you're interested, I could bring one of my gentler horses to the school someday. Give the children a lesson on proper care and riding. Might be educational, and it would certainly hold their attention." "That's a wonderful idea," Fiona said enthusiastically. Many of them come from farming or ranching families, but some of the town children have limited experience with horses. It would be valuable knowledge for all of them. Next week, perhaps, when you've settled into a routine. Perfect, Fiona agreed. The children will be thrilled. Vincent smiled, pleased by her enthusiasm. I should let you finish your work, he said. I just wanted to bring the flowers and check that your first day went well. I appreciate that, Fiona said, walking with him to the door. It means a great deal to have your support. At the doorway, Vincent turned to face her. You've made quite an impression on this town already, Fiona Bennet, he said softly, and not just on the schoolchildren. Before she could respond, he leaned down and pressed another brief kiss to her cheek, his hand lightly touching her arm. Good evening, he murmured, then turned and walked away, leaving Fiona once again watching his retreating figure with her heart beating faster than it should. The following weeks established a pattern to Fiona's life in Silver Creek. Weekdays were devoted to teaching, with evenings spent preparing lessons and grading the children's work. Saturdays were for household chores and shopping in town, often including lunch with Charlotte Williams or other new friends. Sundays meant church services in the morning, followed by dinner with Vincent at the hotel restaurant, where they would discuss books, share stories about their respective weeks, and gradually reveal more of themselves to each other. Vincent's visit to the school with his horse, a gentle mare named Daisy, was a tremendous success. The children were enthralled as he demonstrated proper grooming, saddling, and basic riding techniques. Even the most restless students paid rapt attention, and for days afterward, their compositions and conversations were filled with references to the visit. As October painted the surrounding hills with autumn colors, Fiona found herself increasingly drawn to the quiet rancher. Vincent was unlike any man she had known in Boston, straightforward but thoughtful, physically strong yet gentle in his actions, reserved in public but surprisingly open when they were alone. Their Sunday dinners had become the highlight of her week, and she found herself counting the days between them. On one such Sunday in mid-October, their usual dinner was interrupted when a breathless young boy burst into the hotel restaurant, scanning the room frantically before spotting Vincent. Mr. Vaughn, he called, rushing to their table. Pa sent me to fetch you. There's trouble at the ranch. Vincent was on his feet immediately. What kind of trouble, Billy? Fire, sir, the boy gasped. Lightning struck the north pasture. The grass is burning, heading toward the winter hay storage. Pa says they need every man they can get. Vincent turned to Fiona, regret clear in his eyes. I'm sorry, go, she interrupted. Don't worry about me. Vincent nodded gratefully, then addressed the restaurant owner. Tom, see that Miss Bennet gets home safely. Without waiting for a response, he hurried out with the boy. Fiona found herself unable to finish her meal, her thoughts with Vincent and the danger he was facing. Prairie fires were notoriously fast-moving and destructive, capable of consuming everything in their path. True to Vincent's request, Tom insisted on escorting her back to the teacher's cottage, though Fiona would have preferred to remain in town, closer to any news. The hours crawled by as she tried to distract herself with lesson preparations, but her mind kept conjuring images of Vincent fighting the flames, possibly injured or worse. It was nearly midnight when a knock at her door startled her from an uneasy doze in her chair. She rushed to open it, finding Vincent standing there, his clothes smoke-stained and his face smudged with soot, but otherwise unharmed. Vincent, thank God you're safe, Fiona exclaimed, relief washing over her. Come in, please. He stepped inside, removing his hat. I'm sorry to call so late, he said, his voice hoarse from smoke. I wanted you to know we managed to contain the fire. Lost some grazing land and a small storage shed, but the main buildings and livestock are safe. I'm just glad you're all right, Fiona said, leading him to a chair. Sit down. You look exhausted. Can I get you some water? Tea. Water would be welcome, Vincent admitted. It was hot, dirty work. Fiona fetched a glass of water, which he drank gratefully. In the lamplight, she could see burns on his hands where sparks had landed and a nasty scratch across one cheek. You're hurt, she said, reaching for her first aid supplies. Let me tend to those burns. Vincent tried to protest, but Fiona was already dampening a clean cloth. This isn't negotiable, she said firmly. I've treated worse injuries during my teaching career. Children are remarkably creative about hurting themselves. A smile briefly cracked through the soot on Vincent's face. Yes, madam. Fiona gently cleaned the burns on his hands, applying a salve she kept for schoolyard accidents. Vincent winced slightly but made no complaint. As she worked, she was acutely aware of their proximity, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. Thank you, Vincent said softly when she finished bandaging his hands. You have a gentle touch. Let me clean that scratch too, Fiona said, moving to stand before him. She carefully wiped the dirt from the cut on his cheek, trying to ignore how intimate it felt to be this close, to touch his face with such care. Vincent's eyes never left her face as she worked, his gaze so intense that Fiona felt her cheeks grow warm. When she finished, her hand lingered on his cheek a moment longer than necessary. There, she whispered. That should help. Neither moved for a long moment. Then Vincent slowly raised his bandaged hand to cover hers where it rested against his cheek. Fiona, he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. I need to tell you something. Her heart quickened. Yes. When that boy came running in today, all I could think about was getting back to the ranch, saving what we've built, Vincent began. But as I was fighting that fire, watching the flames and thinking about what could be lost, I realized something. The ranch, the cattle, the buildings, they're important, but they're just things. They can be rebuilt. He took a deep breath. What I couldn't bear to lose was the chance to see you again, to hear your laugh, to watch your eyes light up when you talk about your students, to simply be near you. His fingers tightened gently around hers. I've been alone for a long time, Fiona. I thought that was my lot in life after the war. But then you came to Silver Creek and everything changed. Fiona felt tears gathering in her eyes at the raw honesty in his voice. Vincent, I love you, he said simply. I know it's too soon. We've known each other barely 2 months, but I've never been more certain of anything in my life. A tear slipped down Fiona's cheek as joy bloomed in her chest. It's not too soon, she whispered. Not when it's right. Vincent's eyes widened with hope. Fiona, I love you too, she said, her voice steady despite her tears. I think I have since that first night when you rescued me and walked me home. A smile of such radiance spread across Vincent's face that it seemed to wash away the exhaustion and soot. He stood, drawing her into his arms with infinite tenderness. May I kiss you properly this time? He asked, his voice a low rumble that she felt as much as heard. In answer, Fiona raised her face to his. Vincent's lips met hers in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened as months of unspoken longing found expression. His arms tightened around her waist, drawing her closer, while her hands slid up to his shoulders, anchoring herself against the tide of emotion. When they finally parted, both were breathless. Vincent rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if savoring the moment. I should go, he said reluctantly. It's late, and the proprieties should be observed even if my heart would have me stay. Fiona nodded, though she was loath to end this perfect moment. When will I see you again? Tomorrow, Vincent promised. I need to oversee the cleanup at the ranch, but I'll come to town as soon as I can. He brushed a strand of hair from her face. Now that I've told you how I feel, now that I know you feel the same, I don't want to waste any more time." He kissed her once more, briefly but with feeling, then stepped back. "Good night, my love," he said, the endearment making Fiona's heart soar. "Good night," she replied softly. "Be careful riding home." With a final smile, Vincent donned his hat and left, his steps lighter despite his exhaustion. Fiona watched from the doorway until he mounted his horse and rode away, her fingers touching her lips where the warmth of his kiss still lingered. That night, as she prepared for bed, Fiona felt as though her life had shifted on its axis. She had come to Silver Creek seeking a new beginning, a place to rebuild her life through her teaching. She had not expected to find love, especially not with a man so different from the gentleman she had known in Boston. Yet Vincent's quiet strength, his intelligence, and his fundamental goodness had captured her heart completely. As she drifted off to sleep, Fiona knew with absolute certainty that her future was here in this frontier town, with the man who had pulled a drunk off her in the street, and in doing so, had changed the course of her life forever. The following weeks were the happiest of Fiona's life. Vincent called on her properly the day after their declarations, bearing a small bouquet of the last autumn flowers and asking, with endearing formality, if he might court her officially. Fiona had laughed and reminded him they had already declared their love, but Vincent insisted on doing things properly. "You deserve to be courted properly," he said, "not just swept off your feet by a dusty rancher." Their courtship quickly became the talk of Silver Creek. Vincent now attended every school and community event, proudly escorting Fiona and making no secret of his affection for her. The speculation about when they might announce an engagement grew with each passing week. November brought colder weather and the first snowfall. The schoolhouse was warm and cozy thanks to the pot-bellied stove, which Vincent insisted on filling with wood each morning before heading to his ranch. The children thrived under Fiona's guidance, even the once troublesome Marshall boys, who had developed a particular respect for Miss Bennett's beau, as they called Vincent. As Thanksgiving approached, Vincent invited Fiona to spend the holiday at his ranch. "My foreman and his wife will be there along with the ranch hands," he assured her. "All very proper, but I'd like you to see my home to know if you could be happy there." The implied question behind his words was clear, and Fiona's heart raced at the thought. "I'd love to come," she said. "And Vincent, I already know I could be happy anywhere you are." The morning of Thanksgiving dawned clear and cold. Vincent arrived at the teacher's cottage early, driving a handsome buggy with warm blankets piled on the seat. The journey to the ranch took nearly an hour, during which Vincent pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the land they passed. As they crested a small rise, the Vaughn Ranch came into view. Nestled in a sheltered valley with pine-covered hills rising behind it, the property was larger and more impressive than Fiona had imagined. A substantial two-story house of hewn logs stood at the center, with a broad porch wrapping around it. Nearby were several outbuildings, corrals, and a large barn. Smoke rose cheerfully from the main house's chimney, promising warmth within. "It's beautiful," Fiona breathed. Vincent looked pleased. "It's taken years to build it to this point," he said. "Started with just a one-room cabin and a handful of cattle. Now we run 200 head and employ 6 hands year-round." As they approached, a middle-aged couple emerged from the house onto the porch. Vincent explained they were Robert and Martha Johnson, his foreman and housekeeper, who lived in a smaller house on the property. "They've been with me since the beginning," Vincent said. "More family than employees, really." Martha welcomed Fiona warmly, ushering her inside while the men saw to the buggy and horses. The interior of the house was as impressive as its exterior spacious, well-built, and surprisingly refined for a bachelor's home on the frontier. The main floor contained a large kitchen with a massive cooking hearth, a formal dining room, and a comfortable parlor dominated by a stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with the volumes Vincent hadn't loaned to the school. The master built most of the furniture himself, Martha explained as she showed Fiona around. He's got quite a talent for woodworking. Indeed, the dining table, chairs, and various cabinets throughout the house showed expert craftsmanship. Fiona ran her hand along the smooth surface of a sideboard, admiring the inlaid design. "He made all of this?" she asked, impressed. Martha nodded. "Winter evenings and rainy days. Says it keeps his hands busy and his mind calm." She gave Fiona a knowing look. Though he's had less time for it lately, what with his frequent trips to town. Fiona felt her cheeks warm at the gentle teasing. Martha laughed and patted her arm. "It's good to see him happy, miss. The master's been alone too long." The Thanksgiving meal was a festive affair, with the ranch hands joining them at the long dining table. Vincent sat at the head, with Fiona at his right, looking perfectly at home in the role of hostess. The food was plentiful and delicious: a roast turkey, venison, various vegetables from the ranch's root cellar, freshly baked bread, and Martha's famous apple and pumpkin pies. After the meal, the hands returned to their quarters, and Robert and Martha tactfully withdrew to their own home, leaving Vincent and Fiona alone in the parlor. A fire crackled cheerfully in the hearth as they sat side by side on the comfortable sofa. "So," Vincent said, taking her hand in his, "what do you think of the ranch?" "It's wonderful," Fiona said honestly. "You've built something truly impressive here, Vincent. You should be proud." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I am proud of it, but lately I've realized something's missing." He turned to face her more directly. "A house, no matter how well built, isn't really a home without love in it." Fiona's heart began to race as Vincent slid from the sofa to one knee before her, still holding her hand. "Fiona Bennett," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes, "I love you more than I ever thought possible. You've brought joy and purpose back into my life. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears of happiness filled Fiona's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Vincent, I will marry you." Joy transformed Vincent's face. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Opening it, he revealed a delicate gold ring set with a modest but sparkling diamond. "It was my mother's," he explained as he slipped it onto her finger. "She made me promise to give it only to a woman I loved with my whole heart." "It's beautiful," Fiona said, admiring how the firelight caught the facets of the stone. "I'll treasure it always." Vincent rose and sat beside her again, drawing her into his arms for a tender kiss that soon deepened with the promise of their future together. When they finally parted, both were breathless and flushed. "When?" Vincent asked simply. Fiona considered. "I promised the school board I would complete the full term, which ends in May." Vincent nodded. "A spring wedding, then. Perfect timing. The busy calving season will be over and the summer work not yet begun." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "And 6 months isn't so long to wait when we have a lifetime ahead of us." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Silver Creek. Most received it with delight, particularly the children, who peppered Fiona with questions about whether she would still be their teacher after she became Mrs. Vaughn. She would, at least until the end of the term, she assured them. The winter months passed in a whirl of activity. During the week, Fiona taught and prepared her lessons. Weekends were often spent at the ranch, where she and Vincent made plans for their future, and she became more familiar with the workings of the property that would soon be her home. Martha took Fiona under her wing, teaching her the particulars of running such a large household and managing the practical aspects of ranch life. Christmas brought a special joy as they celebrated with both the school community and the ranch family. Vincent gifted Fiona with a beautiful writing desk for her classroom, handcrafted during the long winter evenings. Fiona, in turn, presented him with a finely bound journal she had ordered from back east, its leather cover embossed with his initials. "For recording the history of our family," she explained as he ran his fingers over the tooled leather. "A legacy for our children and grandchildren." Vincent's eyes had misted at her words, and he'd kissed her with such tenderness that Fiona felt her heart might burst with happiness. January and February brought heavy snows that sometimes made travel between town and the ranch impossible for days at a time. During one such separation, a letter arrived for Fiona from Boston, a response to one she had written months earlier to her father's oldest friend, Judge William Harrington, informing him of her new position and, more recently, her engagement. The judge's reply was warm and congratulatory, but it also contained surprising news. Her father's investments, which she had believed lost after his death, had partially recovered. The judge, acting as executor of the estate, had managed to salvage a modest sum, not a fortune, but enough to provide Fiona with a respectable dowry. "I know your parents would want you to have this security as you begin your married life," the judge wrote. "Consider it their wedding gift to you and Mr. Vaughn." When the roads cleared enough for Vincent to visit, Fiona shared the news with mixed emotions. On one hand, she was grateful for the unexpected financial security. On the other, she was concerned about how Vincent might receive the information. "I want you to know that this changes nothing about why I accepted your proposal," she said anxiously after explaining the situation. "I would marry you if I had nothing but the clothes on my back." Vincent listened thoughtfully, then took her hands in his. "Fiona, I never doubted your reasons for accepting me," he said gently. "And I'm glad you'll have this security, not because we need the money, but because it was your parents' wish for you." Relief washed over her. "So you're not upset," Vincent chuckled. "Why would I be upset that my future wife has received an unexpected blessing? The ranch is doing well, and I've saved carefully over the years. We would have been comfortable regardless. But if this brings you peace of mind, then I'm grateful for it." As the winter snows began to melt in March, wedding preparations intensified. The ceremony would take place in the Silver Creek Church, with a reception to follow at the town hall. Charlotte Williams had taken charge of many of the arrangements, enlisting other townswomen to help with decorations, food, and the countless details required for such an event. Fiona wrote to her few remaining connections in Boston, inviting them to the wedding, though she knew the distance made attendance unlikely for most. To her surprise, Judge Harrington replied that he would make the journey, unwilling to miss the marriage of his old friend's daughter. April brought warmer weather and the first spring flowers. At the ranch, calving season was in full swing, keeping Vincent busy from dawn to dusk. Despite his exhaustion, he rode into town every few days to see Fiona, sometimes arriving at the schoolhouse just as classes were ending, much to the delight of the students, who had adopted him as a sort of unofficial assistant teacher. On one such visit in late April, less than a month before the wedding, Vincent arrived looking troubled. He waited until the last student had departed before explaining the reason for his concern. "The man who attacked you last fall is back in town," he said without preamble. "Jake Dillon. He's been working at a ranch north of here, but apparently lost that job due to his drinking. I saw him at the saloon yesterday." Fiona felt a chill at the memory of that frightening encounter. "Did he say anything to you?" Not directly, Vincent said. But he was making comments within my hearing about uppity schoolmarms and interfering ranchers. The bartender said he's been asking questions about you, where you live, your routines. Concern creased Fiona's brow. You think he means to cause trouble? I think he's a drunk with a grudge, Vincent said bluntly, which makes him unpredictable and potentially dangerous. I've spoken to the sheriff, but there's not much he can do unless Dylan actually breaks the law. What should we do? Fiona asked. Vincent took her hands. For now, be extra cautious. Don't walk alone, especially after dark. I've asked Robert to stay in town for a few days to keep an eye on things while I'm busy at the ranch. He'll be discreet, but he'll be watching. Fiona nodded, trying not to let fear overtake her. The wedding is so close, she said. Surely he wouldn't risk serious trouble just for revenge. A man like that doesn't think clearly, Vincent said grimly. But don't worry too much. Between the sheriff, Robert, and myself, we'll make sure you're safe. True to his word, Vincent arranged for protection without being obvious about it. Robert Johnson took a room at the boarding house, ostensibly in town on ranch business. The sheriff increased his patrols past the schoolhouse and teacher's cottage. Vincent himself rode into town more frequently, often staying late into the evening before reluctantly returning to the ranch. For several days, there was no sign of trouble. Jake Dillon was seen drinking at the saloon occasionally, but otherwise kept to himself. Fiona began to hope that Vincent's concerns had been overstated. Then, a week before the wedding, Fiona stayed late at the schoolhouse, finalizing grades for the term. Absorbed in her work, she didn't notice the lengthening shadows until she realized she could barely see the papers before her. Lighting a lamp, she was startled to see it was nearly 7 o'clock. Gathering her materials quickly, Fiona extinguished the lamp and locked the schoolhouse door. The spring evening was pleasant, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of new growth. She started toward her cottage, then remembered she had promised to return Charlotte's cake recipe book, which she had borrowed to decide on their wedding cake. The Williams Mercantile was only a block from the schoolhouse, in the opposite direction from her cottage. Fiona hesitated, considering whether to wait until morning, but decided the short detour would be fine in the early evening light. The store was closed when she arrived, but lights glowed in the family's living quarters above. Fiona knocked on the side door that led to their private entrance. After a moment, Charlotte opened it, surprise evident on her face. "Fiona, what brings you by so late?" "I wanted to return your recipe book," Fiona explained, handing over the volume. "I lost track of time at the school and was passing by on my way home." Charlotte frowned. "You shouldn't be walking alone, not with that man in town. Thomas, fetch your coat," she called over her shoulder to her husband. "You'll walk Fiona home." "There's no need to trouble him," Fiona protested. "It's still light out and my cottage is only a few blocks away." "Nonsense," Charlotte said firmly. "Vincent would never forgive us if something happened to you on our watch. Besides, Thomas needs the exercise." Thomas Williams appeared, good-naturedly pulling on his coat. "Happy to escort you, Miss Bennet." "Been sitting with the account books all afternoon. My legs could use the stretching." Knowing further protest would be futile, Fiona accepted the escort. They chatted pleasantly as they walked, discussing the upcoming wedding and the end of the school term. They were just a block from Fiona's cottage when a figure stepped out from between two buildings, directly into their path. Even in the fading light, Fiona recognized Jake Dillon. His unshaven face was flushed with drink, his eyes narrowed with malice as they fixed on her. Well, well," he slurred. "If it ain't the fancy schoolteacher and her shopkeeper friend." Thomas stepped slightly in front of Fiona. "Evening, Dillon. We're just passing by." Dillon ignored him, his bloodshot eyes focused on Fiona. Been waiting for a chance to talk to you, teacher lady. Your cowboy ain't always gonna be around to protect you. Mr. Dillon, I have no quarrel with you, Fiona said, striving to keep her voice steady. Please let us pass. Dillon took a step toward them. You humiliated me, he growled. Got me run out of town. Lost my job because of the stories people told. You lost your job because you're a drunk, Thomas said bluntly. Now step aside before I call the sheriff. Dillon's hand moved to his belt, where Fiona could now see a knife sheathed. Sheriff's at the other end of town, he said with an ugly smile. Won't get here in time to help you. Thomas pushed Fiona fully behind him. Run to your cottage, he murmured. Lock the door and don't open it for anyone but me or the sheriff. I can't leave you, Fiona began. Go, Thomas insisted. Now. As Dillon advanced, Fiona turned and ran. She heard a scuffle behind her but didn't look back, focusing on reaching the safety of her cottage. Her heart pounded in her ears as she fumbled with the key, finally managing to unlock the door and stumble inside. She slammed the door shut and turned the lock, then leaned against it, breathing heavily. Through the small window, she could see Thomas and Dillon still struggling in the street. Thomas seemed to be holding his own, but Dillon had the knife out now, slashing wildly. Fiona knew she needed help. The nearest neighbor who might have a weapon was 2 houses away. She was considering whether to risk running there when the sound of hoofbeats caught her attention. A rider was galloping down the street toward the fighting men, a tall figure on a chestnut horse that Fiona instantly recognized. Vincent leapt from his horse while it was still moving, launching himself at Dillon with such force that both men went sprawling. Thomas staggered back, clutching his arm where Dillon's knife had caught him. Fiona unlocked her door and rushed to Thomas's side. You're hurt, she gasped, seeing blood seeping between his fingers. Just a cut, Thomas assured her, though his face was pale. Not deep. Their attention was drawn to the vicious struggle taking place a few yards away. Vincent and Dillon were locked in combat, rolling in the dirt as each sought to gain the upper hand. Dillon still had his knife, which glinted dangerously in the last light of day. The sheriff, Fiona said urgently. Someone needs to get the sheriff. But before Thomas could move, a shot rang out. All 4 of them froze. At the end of the street stood Sheriff Harding, his revolver pointed skyward. That's enough, he bellowed, striding toward them. The next shot won't be a warning. Dillon, who had ended up on top in the struggle, hesitated just long enough for Vincent to buck him off and scramble to his feet. In one fluid motion, Vincent kicked the knife from Dillon's hand, sending it skittering across the dirt. Sheriff Harding reached them, his revolver now trained steadily on Dillon. On your feet, Jake, he ordered. Hands where I can see them. Dillon slowly stood, hatred burning in his eyes as he glared at Vincent and Fiona. This ain't over, he spat. Oh, it's over all right, the sheriff said grimly. Assault with a deadly weapon will get you at least 5 years in the territorial prison, maybe more, considering your prior offenses. As the sheriff secured Dillon's hands behind his back, Vincent rushed to Fiona's side. Are you hurt? He asked, his eyes scanning her frantically for injuries. I'm fine, she assured him. But Thomas was cut. Vincent turned his attention to the shopkeeper's arm. Let me see, he said, gently moving Thomas's hand away from the wound. Not too deep, but it needs cleaning and bandaging. Charlotte will have your hide if it gets infected. Speaking of Charlotte, Thomas said with a weak smile, someone should tell her what happened before rumors get out of hand. I'll send a deputy, Sheriff Harding said, overhearing as he marched Dillon past them. He can escort her to the doctor's office to meet you. As the sheriff led Dillon away, Vincent wrapped a handkerchief around Thomas's wound as a temporary bandage. Let's get you to the doctor, he said. Fiona, are you able to walk or do you need a moment? Fiona took a deep breath, steadying herself. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she felt shaky with delayed fear, but she straightened her shoulders. "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. "Thomas was injured protecting me. The least I can do is make sure he's properly cared for." Vincent's eyes softened with pride and love. "That's my brave girl," he said quietly. The three of them walked to the doctor's office, where Dr. Mitchell cleaned and stitched Thomas's wound while Fiona and Vincent waited in the outer room. Charlotte arrived shortly after, rushing to her husband's side with frantic concern that quickly gave way to righteous anger when she learned what had happened. "That miserable, drunken scoundrel," she fumed. "He ought to be horse-whipped. He'll face justice," Vincent assured her. "The sheriff is a fair man, but he doesn't take kindly to people who threaten the peace in his town." When Thomas was properly bandaged and dosed with laudanum for the pain, Vincent insisted on driving them all home in his buggy. He delivered the Williamses to their door first, waving away their profuse thanks. "You protected what's precious to me," Vincent told Thomas seriously. "That's a debt I can never fully repay." At Fiona's cottage, Vincent helped her inside, then built up the fire in her small stove to chase away the evening chill. Only when she was settled in her chair with a cup of tea did he kneel beside her, taking her hands in his. "I almost lost you today," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When I rode into town and saw Dylan with that knife." "But you didn't lose me," Fiona said softly, touching his cheek. "You came just as you did that first night." Vincent turned his face to press a kiss to her palm. "I'll always come for you, Fiona. Always." He stayed with her until she was calm enough to rest, then reluctantly prepared to leave. Propriety demanded he not remain overnight, regardless of the circumstances, not with their wedding so close. "I'll be back at first light," he promised at the door. "And I'll speak to the school board about finding a substitute for the remaining days of the term. After what happened, no one will expect you to continue teaching right now." Fiona started to protest, but realized he was right. Her nerves were frayed, and the children deserved a teacher who could focus fully on their education. "Just for a few days," she conceded, "until things settle." Vincent kissed her gently. "Try to rest. It's over now." But as Fiona prepared for bed that night, she couldn't shake the memory of Jake Dillon's venomous glare or his ominous words. "This ain't over." She told herself it was merely the threats of a desperate man being led away to prison, but a shadow of unease lingered as she drifted into an uneasy sleep. The following days passed in a blur of activity. As Vincent had predicted, the school board readily agreed to a substitute teacher for the remaining 2 weeks of the term, expressing concern for Fiona's well-being and gratitude that she hadn't been harmed in the attack. Jake Dillon was held in the town jail awaiting transfer to the territorial prison. The sheriff assured Vincent and Fiona that he was securely locked up and posed no further threat to anyone. Wedding preparations continued, now with an added sense of urgency and relief. The incident had shaken everyone involved, making them all the more determined to celebrate the union of two people who had faced danger together and emerged stronger. Judge Harrington arrived from Boston 5 days before the wedding, a distinguished gentleman whose courtly manners and Eastern refinement caused quite a stir in Silver Creek. He took an immediate liking to Vincent, approving of the man Fiona had chosen to marry. "Your father would have liked him," the judge told Fiona as they took tea in her cottage. "A man of substance and character, not merely wealth and position." "I wish they could have met," Fiona said wistfully. "I think they would have found much in common despite their different backgrounds." The judge patted her hand. "They have the most important thing in common: they both love you dearly." The day before the wedding, A U.S. Marshal arrived to transport Jake Dillon to the territorial prison. The town breathed a collective sigh of relief as the prisoner was led away in chains, finally removing the last shadow from the upcoming celebration. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with spring flowers blooming and birds singing as if nature itself approved of the union. At the small house behind the church where Fiona was preparing, Charlotte and several other women helped her dress in the wedding gown they had collectively created, a beautiful creation of ivory silk, with delicate lace that Charlotte had specially ordered from back east. "You look radiant," Charlotte declared as she arranged Fiona's veil. "Vincent won't know what hit him." Judge Harrington knocked at the door as the women were making final adjustments. When invited in, he stopped in the doorway, momentarily overcome with emotion at the sight of Fiona in her bridal finery. "My dear," he said when he recovered his voice, "you are the very image of your mother on her wedding day. She would be so proud." Fiona blinked back tears, unwilling to ruin Charlotte's careful work with her cosmetics. "Thank you for being here," she said, taking the judge's offered arm. "It means everything to have someone from my old life to witness the beginning of my new one." At the church, every seat was filled. The entire town had turned out for the event, along with the ranch hands and neighbors from outlying farms and ranches. As the organ began to play, Fiona took a deep breath and nodded to the judge. The doors opened, and they began their walk down the aisle. Vincent stood at the altar, looking more handsome than Fiona had ever seen him in a new black suit, his dark hair neatly combed, his face clean-shaven. But it was the expression in his eyes as he watched her approach that took Fiona's breath away, a look of such profound love and wonder that she felt tears threatening again. The ceremony was simple but deeply moving. They exchanged traditional vows, their voices clear and unwavering as they promised to love, honor, and cherish each other for all their days. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent's kiss was tender yet passionate enough to elicit a few good-natured chuckles from the congregation. The reception at the town hall was a joyous affair, with abundant food, music, and dancing. Everyone wanted to congratulate the newlyweds, resulting in a constant stream of well-wishers that kept them busy for hours. Through it all, Vincent rarely let go of Fiona's hand, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. As the celebration continued into the evening, Vincent finally managed to steal his bride away for a moment of privacy in the small garden behind the hall. "Mrs. Vaughn," he said, drawing her into his arms, "I've been waiting all day to have you to myself, if only for a minute." "Mr. Vaughn," Fiona replied with a smile, "I believe we'll have plenty of time alone very soon." Vincent's eyes darkened at her words, and he lowered his head to kiss her with a passion that left no doubt about his eagerness for their wedding night. When they parted, both were breathless. "Perhaps we should make our departure soon," Vincent suggested, his voice husky. Fiona nodded, feeling a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. "I believe we've fulfilled our social obligations," she agreed. They returned to the hall to find Judge Harrington preparing to make a toast. The guests quieted as he raised his glass. "To Vincent and Fiona Vaughn," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room. "May your union be blessed with joy, prosperity, and many children to fill your home with laughter. And may you always remember, through whatever challenges life may bring, the love that brought you together on this day." "To Vincent and Fiona," the crowd echoed, raising their glasses. As the toast concluded, Charlotte approached with a meaningful glance at the clock. "I believe it's time for the bride to change," she murmured to Fiona. "Unless you plan to travel in your wedding gown." With a blush, Fiona allowed herself to be led away to change into the traveling suit that had been prepared for her journey to the ranch, now her home. When she emerged, Vincent was waiting with the buggy, their luggage already loaded, the horses adorned with ribbons and flowers courtesy of the schoolchildren. The townspeople gathered to see them off, showering them with rice and good wishes as Vincent helped Fiona into the buggy. With a final wave to their friends, they set off toward the ranch, leaving the sounds of celebration behind them. The evening was perfect, with a full moon illuminating the landscape in silver light. Vincent drove with one hand, his other arm wrapped around Fiona, holding her close against the cool night air. "Happy?" he asked softly as they turned onto the road that led to the ranch. Fiona leaned her head against his shoulder. "Completely," she answered. "Though I can scarcely believe it's real, that I'm actually Mrs. Vincent Vaughn." "Believe it," Vincent said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "You're my wife, Fiona, now and always." The ranch house came into view, windows glowing with welcoming light. Martha and Robert had gone ahead to prepare everything for the newlyweds' arrival, and as Vincent helped Fiona down from the buggy, the front door opened to reveal the house beautifully decorated with flowers and candles. "Welcome home, Mrs. Vaughn," Martha called, beaming. Vincent surprised Fiona by sweeping her into his arms and carrying her across the threshold. "Tradition," he explained with a grin as he set her down in the entryway. Martha showed them to the dining room, where a cold supper had been laid out, along with a bottle of champagne sent by Judge Harrington as a wedding gift. After assuring the newlyweds that everything was prepared for their comfort, Martha and Robert tactfully withdrew to their own home, leaving Vincent and Fiona alone. They shared the light meal, talking softly about the day's events and the many kindnesses shown by their friends and neighbors. When they finished, Vincent took Fiona's hand and led her upstairs to the master bedroom, which had been transformed with fresh linens, flowers, and softly glowing lamps. Any nervousness Fiona might have felt dissolved in the tenderness of Vincent's love. Their wedding night was everything she could have hoped for, a perfect union of two people who had found in each other a love worth waiting for. As they lay together afterward, Vincent's arms securely around her, Fiona felt a profound sense of peace and rightness. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. Vincent's arms tightened around her. "And I love you," he replied, "more than I ever thought possible." In that moment, surrounded by the warmth of their love and the promise of their future together, Fiona knew she had found her true home. Not in a place, but in the heart of the man who had rescued her from danger on a dark street and, in doing so, had saved them both from loneliness. The years that followed brought all the joy, challenges, and growth that make a marriage strong. Vincent and Fiona welcomed their first child, a son they named William after Judge Harrington, just over a year after their wedding. A daughter, Eleanor, followed 2 years later, and another son, James, 2 years after that. Fiona continued teaching until her first pregnancy, then became a valued member of the school board, helping to shape education in Silver Creek as the town grew. Vincent's ranch prospered, eventually becoming one of the largest and most successful operations in the county. They never forgot how they had met a chance encounter on a dark street that had changed both their lives forever. Sometimes, on the anniversary of that night, Vincent would tease Fiona about how she had initially been wary of him. "Can you blame me?" she would laugh. "A strange man in the dark, even one rescuing me from a drunk, wasn't automatically trustworthy." "And now?" Vincent would ask, drawing her into his arms. "Now," Fiona would reply, her eyes full of love, "I trust you with everything I am and everything I have. My heart, my life, our children, all the treasures that matter." It was a love story told and retold in Silver Creek for generations, how a Boston schoolteacher and a Wyoming rancher found each other under the most unlikely circumstances and built a life of extraordinary happiness together. A reminder that sometimes the greatest journeys begin with a single, unexpected moment of courage and kindness.